Hi, it's Sarah with mynaturalbabybirth.com. So last week we did a little tiny series about the differences between the stages of birth and the stages of labor and how one is actually inside the other and they're different. And the two phrases can be confused. And so if you didn't see that, check that out. But then we had a bunch of questions come in about, well, Sarah, if I'm in one of the stages of labor, how do I know where I'm at? There was a little confusion about how exactly do I know if I'm in the first stage or the second or the third? What can I do in each of those stages? What are the common problems? And how can I get through them quicker, right? So we're going to do a deep dive over the next 3 days of the 3 stages of labor, and more specifically what you can expect in each of those and what you can do to move things along. So today is stage 1 of labor, and this is really the trickiest, most confusing, the most frustrating stage of labor. It lasts the longest. The first stage of labor can be a couple of hours up to a couple of weeks. And most of the time, you don't even know you're in it because it's elusive. It's different for every mom. There are many, many different symptoms, and you can fool yourself into thinking you're in actual labor and you're not, or you may be totally oblivious to what's going on. So, just to recap a little bit of what we talked about last week, the first stage of labor is when you are not even dilated up until 4 centimeters. From 0 to 4 centimeters is approximately the range of when you are in the first stage of labor. And during this time, you are also effacing. So what that means, dilating is opening your vagina wider and wider. Effacing is when your vagina gets thinner and thinner. So before you start dilating, your vagina is actually like an inch thick. And there's the mucous membrane, and it's actually pretty thick. But when you're about to give birth, the weeks leading up to, it starts to get really thin, almost as thin as like a layer of paper. And before you start to dilate, you're going to efface about 50%, and then you start to open up and continue to efface. You'll be in active labor before you're even effaced 100%. And so that is going on. That is kind of the medical perspective. Oh, it's when you're this dilated to that. But really, you can't feel that. You don't know that unless someone checks you. What are the signs and symptoms that you can tell when you are in actual first stage of labor? Those things we're going to list them out and talk about them. So you can have false labor. You can have Braxton Hicks that are super strong. You can have period-like cramps and interchangeable combinations of each of those. They can be random. They can seem like they're timed. They can be constant for weeks leading up. And when I say false labor is actually kind of real labor in the sense that it happens usually during the first stage of labor. But we call it false because there's no consistent contractions. You aren't fully dilating yet. You can't consistently rely on them. False labor can feel like back pain. It can be low down in your belly, down by your cervix. And the way to know if it's false is if you feel like what you think is a contraction and you feel more throughout the day, time them and see if the amount of time in between them is consistent or they get closer together. That's how you know you're in real labor. But false labor does not follow that pattern. Your false labor is inconsistent. You could have contractions between or pains, 10 minutes apart, 2 hours apart, 5 minutes apart. It's inconsistent. And a for sure way to test it is get up and walk around. Go on a walk for at least 10, 15 minutes and see if those contractions help or go away. If you're not able to go on a walk, you can take a shower or a warm bath and see if that makes them go away, or they keep on coming and they're still consistent. So part of the first stage of labor is you can have false labor for the weeks leading up to it. It's frustrating, I know, but that's how you can tell. Braxton Hicks we mentioned. Now, Braxton Hicks are not contractions that literally dilate or efface you. Braxton Hicks is when your uterus, it just hardens up. It's a muscle. Think of when you flex a muscle in your arm and it gets hard. That's what your uterus is doing. It gets hard and it feels really tight. And when you tap on your stomach, it feels like a bowling ball. And one time I had a Braxton Hick, and my belly, I was on a stool standing at the edge of the counter, and I was leaning forward and my belly was tucked under the counter, and I had a Braxton Hick contraction, and it like got real hard like a bowling ball, and I got stuck. I couldn't move. Your belly's not flexible then, and what is happening is your uterus is getting used. You could say it's warming up. It's warming up to full contractions that are literally going to be pushing the baby out. But it's really just your uterus hardening, kind of like a hard eggshell. It's not squeezing in on your baby. It's not pushing anything out. It's just a hardening, and it can start like on your side and kind of morph over across your belly. It can start at the bottom and like grow to the top. And these are totally random as well. You could feel like they're consistent. You could have them back to back to back for a day, for a few hours, but they do not change your dilation. They do not increase in intensity. They do not, they're not predictable. Usually Braxton Hick happens when you are dehydrated or you're stressed. Now, of course, if you're fully hydrated and you're happy as a clam, you can still have them. But when you can trigger them if you need some water or you're stressed. When I was pregnant with my second son, we had a death in the family. And when we found out about that, I had Braxton Hicks around the clock for like 24 hours. But he was only like I was 6 months along with him, I think. And so the stress of getting down to the end of pregnancy, waiting for your labor to start, can trigger Braxton Hicks, and your uterus is really just getting ready too. So we've talked about false labor, Braxton Hicks, and then there's also just plain period like cramps, because your uterus is still moving your baby around. It's still positioning your baby. There's pressure because your baby's head is dropping lower and lower. When you look at your profile in the side of a mirror, you can see how your belly is dropped, and so the weight and pressure of your baby down there can cause period-like cramps and pains. They're very similar to what a real contraction feels like. They're just less intense, and you can have those as well. You can have your mucus plug fall out during the first stage of labor. You may notice it, you may not notice it at all. I never have noticed when I lost mucus plugs with 3 pregnancies, because you have a gradual discharge anyway. You can lose it in the middle of the night when you use the bathroom, and it's not always noticeable at all. And let's see, what are some other symptoms of early labor? Those are the key early symptoms of knowing that you're in early stage of labor. But really, the only way to know for sure is if you go to the doctor and they check you to see if you're dilating. If they tell you you're really soft, that means you're effacing. You're in the first stage of labor. If you start opening up, 1 centimeter, 2, 3, up to 4, you're in the first stage of labor. You may be having such really minor contractions that you can't even tell. And that's great. You could be having all sorts of off-the-wall pains and tweaks and cramps and contractions all over the place. And it varies with each pregnancy, and it's different every time. So, but just to know for sure, don't worry about being in active labor until you've timed contractions and they are consistently getting closer and closer together. Those are the first stages of labor. And if you have any questions about that, leave me a comment below. While you are getting ready to be in active labor, you can really put your relaxation skills to the test. And so if you check out my ebook at mynaturalbabybirth.com/relax, everything in there will help you maintain a calmer disposition so you have less Braxton Hicks, so the blood pressure doesn't spike, so that when you move into active labor, things are calm and smooth and you do not have the contraction blocking hormones of cortisol and norepinephrine in your bloodstream. And it's a great time to master those relaxation skills. And walking as much as possible is going to get you through that first stage of labor quickly. Now, again, you can be in your first stage of labor anywhere from, naturally 37 weeks to the end. Or even just for a few days. You never know. But at the end of your labor, at the end of your pregnancy, it is key to have as much movement as possible. Stay flexible, stay soft, stay comfortable, stay relaxed. And I know it's hard because you're stressed. You just want the baby out. And right now it's summertime and you're probably dying of heat and you want it over. But I promise you that things will soon pick up. They will get quick. They will speed up, and hop on to the next few videos of the next few days where we talk about stage 2 and stage 3 of your labor so that you know how to maximize what you can do moving forward as well. Okay? Have a great day, guys. Bye.